Hello everyone, this is ASMR Angel Reese. Oh, hold on, I'll be right back. I gotta turn my white noise off. Back. We are continuing Daggerspell. This next part of this book is kind of important in setting up their this first life that they're living right now is about to be really important to the future lives that they have in the future. So Galerion got banished, and now his name is Nevin, and like I said, he's the main character. The woman's hall was sunny, and through the windows, Bragawin could see apple trees so white with perfumed blossoms that it seemed clouds were caught in the very branches. Nearby, Radha and Yasala were talking as they worked at their sewing, but Bragawin let her work lie in her lap. She wanted to weep, but it was so tedious to weep all the time. She prayed Prince Galeron might be well and wondered where he was riding on this lonely road of his. Gwynny, Lady Radha said, shall we walk in the meadow this afternoon? If you wish, my lady. Well, if you'd rather, Gwynny, Yasala put in, we could go riding. Whatever you want. Here, child, Radha said, truly it's time you got over this brooding. Your brother did what was best for you. If my lady says so. It would have been ghastly, Yasala broke in, riding behind a banished man. How can you even think of it? It's a shame. No one would even take you in. It would have been their loss, not ours. Radha sighed and ran her needle into her embroidery. And what about when he got you a child? Galeron never would have let our child starve. You don't understand. I should have gone with him. It would have been all right. I just know it would have been. Now, Gwynny, lamb, you're just not thinking clearly, Radha said. As clearly as I need to, Bragawin snapped. Oh, my pardons, my ladies, but you don't understand. I know I should have gone. Both her friends stared, eyes narrowed in honest concern. They think I'm daft, Bragawin thought, and maybe I am, but I know it. Well, there are a lot of men in the kingdom, Yasala said in an obvious attempt to be helpful. I'll wager you won't have any trouble getting another one. I'll wager he'll be better than Galeron, too. He must have done something awful to get himself exiled. At court, a man has to do very little to get himself out of favor, Radha said. There are plenty of others to do it for him. Now, here, lamb, I won't have Galeron spoken ill of in my hall. He may have failed, but truly, Gwynny, he tried to spare you this. He let me know that he saw trouble coming and he was hoping he'd have time to release you from the betrothal before the blow fell. She shook her head sadly. The king is a very stubborn man. I can't believe that, Bragawin snapped. He never would have cast me off to my shame. I know he loves me. I don't care what you say. Of course he loved you, child, Radha said patiently. That's what I've just been saying. He wanted to release you in such a way as to spare you the slightest hint of shame. When he failed, he planned to take you with him. If it weren't for Garo, Bragawin said. Radha and Yasala glanced at each other, their eyes meeting in silent conference. This argument had come full circle again. In its tedious, predictable way, Bragawin looked out the window at the apple trees and wondered why everything in life seemed tedious. Bragawin and Geraint were visiting the boars done for a few days, and Bragawin knew that Geraint had arranged a visit for her sake. That night at dinner, she watched her brother as he sat across the table and shared a trencher with Yasala. He still had his betrothed Bragawin thought he still has his betrothed Bragawin though, she thought bitterly. It would have been wonderful release to hate him, but she knew that she had done only what he thought was best for her, whether it truly was best or not. Her beloved brother, where did I leave off? Her beloved, whether it truly was best or not, her beloved brother, while their parents and uncles away doted on Garrett, the precious son and heir. They had mostly ignored Bragawin, the unnecessary daughter. Garrett himself, however, had loved her, played with her, helped care for her, and led her around with him in a way that was surprisingly for a lad. She remembered him explaining how to straighten an arrow or build a toy gun with stones, and he was always dragging her out of danger, away from the fierce dog, away from the river's edge, and now away from the man she considered unworthy of her. And through the meal, Garrett would sometimes look up, catch her looking at him, and give her a timid smile. Eventually, Bragawin could no longer bear the crowded hall and made her escape into the cool twilight of Radha's garden. Red as drops of blood, the roses bloomed thickly. She picked one, cradled it in her hand, and remembered Gowron telling her that she was his one true rose. "My lady, are you distressed somewhat?" It was Blaine hurrying across the garden. Bragawin knew perfectly well that he was in love with her. Every soft look, every longing smile that he gave her stabbed her like a knife. "Sorry, my voice is terrible. It's late at night, so..." "How can I not be distressed, my lord?" "Well, true spoken, but every dark time comes to an end." "My lord, I doubt if the dark will ever end for me." "Oh, here, things are never as bad as all that." As shy as a young lad, Blaine smiled at her. Bragawin wondered why she was even bothering to fight. Sooner or later, Garrett would hand her over to his blood-sworn friend, whether she wanted to marry him or not. "My lord is very kind. I hardly know what I say these days." Blaine picked another rose and held it out. Rather than be rude, Bragawin took it. "Let me be blunt, my lady," Blaine said. "You must know that my heart aches to marry you, but I understand what you say about your dark time. Will you think of me this time next year when those roses are blooming again? That's all I ask of you." "I will then, if we both live." Blaine looked up sharply, caught her words, even though it was only empty phrase, a pious acknowledgement that the gods are somewhat stronger than men. As Bragawin groped for something to say to dispel the chill around them, Garrett came out into the garden. "Making sure that I'm treating your sister honorably," Blaine said with a grin. "Oh, I've no doubt you'd always be honorable. I was just wondering what happened to Gwenny." Garrett escorted her back to the women's hall since Radha and Yasala were still at a table. Bragawin allowed him to come in with her. He perched uneasily on the edge of the open window while the servant lit the candles in the sconces with a taper. After the servant left, they were alone, face to face with each other in the silent room. Restlessly, Bragawin turned away and saw a moth fluttering dangerously close to the candle flame. She caught it softly in cupped hands and set it free at the window. "You've got the softest heart in the world," Garrett said. "Well, the poor things are too stupid to know better." Garrett caught both her hands in his. "Gwenny, do you hate me?" "I can never hate you, never." For a moment, Bragawin thought he would weep. "I know that marriage means everything to a lass, but we'll find you a better man than an exile. Has Blaine declared himself to you?" He has, but please, I can't bear thinking of marrying anyone right now. Gwenny, I'll make you a solemn promise. Head of our clan or not, I'll never make you marry until you truly want to. Bragawin threw her arms around his neck and wept against his shoulder. As he stroked her hair, he felt him trembling against her. Take me home, Garrow, please. I want to go home. Well then, that's what we'll do. Yet once they were back in the Falcon Den, Bragawin bitterly regretted leaving Radha and Yasala's company. Everything she saw at home reminded her either of her father or her prince, both irrevocably gone. Up in her bedchamber she had a wooden box filled with courting gifts from Galeron. Brooches, rings, silver goblet with her name on it. He would have had his name put next to hers once they were married. Although she couldn't read, Bragawin would also at times take out the goblet and weep as she traced the writing with her fingertip. The dailiness of her life eventually drew her back from her despair. Bragawin had the servants to supervise, the chamberlain to consult, the household spinning and sewing to oversee and to take up herself. She and her serving woman Luda spent long afternoons working on the household chores and taking turns singing old songs and ballads to each other. Soon, as well as she had a new worry in Garrett. On a day, Soon as well, she had a new worry in Garrett. Often she caught him weeping on their father's grave, and in the evening he turned oddly silent. As he sat in his father's chair, his chair now, he drank steadily and watched the flames playing in the fireplace. Although Bragawin sat beside him out of sisterly duty, she rarely spoke more than 2 words at a time. One day when Garrett was hunting, Gorbert Maddock came for a visit with 6 men of his war band for an escort. As she curtsied to the Gorbert, Bragawin noticed the men staring at her. Sly eyes, little half smiles, and undisgusted lust that she had seen 1,000 times on faces of men. She hated them for it. Greetings, my lady, Maddox said. I've come to pay my respects to your father's grave. After sending the servants to care for his men, Bragawin took Maddock into the hall and poured him ale with her own hands, then sat across from him in the honor table. Maddock pledged her with a tankard. My thanks, Bragawin. Truly, I wanted to see how you fared. As well as I can, your grace. And your brother? He's still mourning our father. I can only hope he'll put his grief away soon. Bragawin saw that he was truly worried, not merely being courteous, and his worry made her own flare. Garrow hasn't been himself of late. I didn't know what's wrong with him. I wonder. Well, here, you know that your brother and yourself are under my protection. If ever you need my aid, you send a page to me straight away. That's no idle courtesy either. Sometimes when a man gets to brooding, he's a bit much for his sister to handle. So send me a message, and I'll ride to cheer Garrow up a bit. Oh, my thanks, truly. That gladdens my heart, your grace. Soon Garrett rode in from hunting, bringing a doe for the cook to clean and hang. Since the 2 men had important matters to discuss, Bragawin withdrew and went outside to look for Luda. Out by the wall, Brythu was helping the cook dress the deer. They cut off the head and thrown it into the pack of dogs who were growling and worrying at it. Although she'd grown up seeing game clean, Bragawin felt sick. The velvet eyes looked up at her like a dog, then a dog dragged it away. Bragawin turned and ran back to the broch. On the morrow, Maddock took leave of them early. As Bragawin and Garrett were eating their noon meal, Garrett told her a bit about his Grace's talk. It looked as if there might be trouble out in the western border where a few clans are still grumbling at the king's rule. I'd hate to see you ride another war so soon, Bragawin said. Why? You're all I have in this world. Suddenly, thoughtfully, Garrett nodded, then cut up a bit of roast fowl on his trencher with his dagger. He picked up a tidbit and fed it to her with his fingers. Well, little sister, I've tried to be mindful of my duties to you. Although it was pleasantly said, Bragawin suddenly felt a cold chill down her back, as if someone were trying to warn her of danger. Yet when the danger finally came, she had no warning at all. On a Sunday afternoon, they rode out together into the wild meadowlands to cast a vast stretch of rolling hills that neither the falcon nor the boar had men enough to till or defend. A little stream that stopped to water their horses. When they were children, this stream had marked the limit of the land where they were allowed to ride, without an adult along. It was odd to think that now, when she could have ridden as far as she wanted, she had no desire to wander away from home. While Garrett tended the horses, Bragawin sat down in the grass and looked for daisies, but she couldn't bear to pluck those innocent symbols of a lass's first love. She had her love and lost him, and doubted as if she'd ever find another. Not merely a husband, but a love. Eventually, Garrett sat down beside her. Going to make a daisy chain, he remarked. I'm not. It's too late for things like that. Garrett looked sharply away. Gwenny, there's something I'd best ask you. It aches my heart to pry, but it's gonna matter someday if I have to bargain out your betrothal. Bragawin knew perfectly well what was on his mind. I didn't bed him. Don't trouble your heart over it for a minute. Garrett smiled in such fierce, gloating relief that all at once he saw the falcon poised hovering on the wind, seemingly motion, although its flight to keep its place. When he struck, catching her by the shoulders and kissing her before she could shove him away. Garrow! Although Bragawin tried to twist free, he was far too strong for her. He held her tight, kissed her, then pinned her down in the grass to give her long, greedy kiss that set her heart pounding only partly in fear. All at once, as silently as he caught her, he let her go and sat back on the grass with tears running down his face. His shoulders ached from those greedy hands, her brother's hands. As she sat up, watching him warily, Garrett pulled his dagger and handed it to her, hilt first. Take it and slit my throat. I'll kneel here and let you do it. Never. Then I'll do it myself. Go home, get Luda, and ride to Maddock. By the time he rides back, I'll be dead. Bragawin felt as if she were a bit of wire being pulled between the jeweler's tools until it's as fine as a single hair. This last loss was too much to bear, her brother, her beloved brother, kneeling before her as a supplicant. If he did kill himself, no one would know the truth of it, thinking a madman over his mourning, not an unclean man who broke the laws of the gods. But she would know, and she would never see him again. The wire was being pulled tighter and tighter. Will you forgive me before I die? Garrett said. She wanted to speak, but no words came. When he misread her silence, his eyes filled with tears. Done then, it was too much to hope for. The wire broke. In a rush of tears, Bragawin flung herself against him. Garrow, 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 you can't die. Garrett dropped the dagger and slowly, hesitantly put his hands around her waist to shove her away, then clasped her tight in his arms. Garrow, please live for my sake. How can I? What shall I do? Live hating my blood-sworn friend if you marry Blaine? Every time you look at me, I'd know you were remembering my fault. But the clan, if you die, the clan dies with you. Ah, by the goddess of the moon, if you kill yourself, I might as well do the same. What else would be left for me? He held her a little ways away from him, and as they looked into each other's eyes, she felt death standing beside her, a palpable presence. Does my maidenhead mean so much to you? Garrett shrugged, refusing to answer. Then you might as well take it. You wouldn't force me for it, so I'll give it to you. He stared at her like a drunken man. Bragawin wondered why he couldn't see what was so clear to her. If they were doomed, they might as well live an hour longer in each other's arms. She put her hands alongside his face and pulled him down to kiss her. His hands dug into her shoulder so tightly it hurt, but she let him kiss her again, and the passion for her flared. It was frightening, wrapping around her, catching her up like a branch in a fire. When she let herself go limp in his arms, Bragawin felt more like a priestess in the rite than a lover. She felt nothing but the force of him, the solid weight of him. Her mind was so far away that she felt she was watching in a dream. When they finished, he lay next to her and pillowed his head on her naked breasts, his mouth moving on her skin, a gentle nuzzling kiss of gratitude. She ran her fingers through his hair and thought of the dagger lying ready for them. I never wanted to die a maid, she thought, and who better than Garrow? He raised his head and smiled at her, a soft, drunken smile of pleasure and love. Are you going to kill me now? Bragawin said. Why? Not yet, my love, not after this. There'll be time enough later for the pair of us to die. I know we will, and the gods know it too, and that's enough for them. We'll have our summer first. Bragawin looked up at the sky, the pale blue glittering like a fiery reproach from the gods. Her hand groped for the dagger. Not yet. Garrett caught her wrist, those heavy, calloused hands circling it, mastering her, grabbing the dagger away. He sat up and threw it. It glittered through the air and plunged into the stream. Bragawin thought of protesting, but his beauty caught her, a cruel, flaming beauty like the angry sun. He ran his hands down her body, then lay down beside her and kissed her. This time she felt her desire rise to match his, bittersweet lust born of despair. When they rode home that evening, Bragawin was surprised that everyone treated him so normally and easily. She expected everyone would see, if not their dishonor, then at least their coming death, as if death should cast a glow around them that could be seen for miles. But Brythur merely took the horses and bowed. The chamberlain came hurrying over to Garrett with some tedious news from the village. Luda met Bragawin and asked if she could set the kitchen maid to laying the table. The evening turned so normal that Bragawin wanted to scream. After the meal, the servants settled in at their hearth, and Garrett, with a tankard in his hand, at his. The great hall was dark except for the cross-battling glows from two small fires. Bragawin watched her brother's shadow face and wondered if he was happy. She hardly knew what she felt. For the past year she'd been readying herself for marriage, when she would swear an oath to her husband and bind herself under his will. Instead, she'd sworn a blood oath, giving up her will to pledge of death. There was nothing left but to center herself on Garrett, her first man, her brother, just as she planned to do with her prince. Until she let Garrett slit her throat, she would serve him as her lord. The decision gave her precarious peace, as if she had closed the door in her mind on a tragedy of the past. Galron was gone, and all the promise he held out of a different kind of life. Garrett, what are you thinking about? That rebellion. If there's a war this summer, I won't go. I promise you that. I'll find a way out. Bragawin smiled, her heart bursting with love. He was making the biggest sacrifice a man like him could, giving up his glory to live with her in the summer and die with her in the fall. Bragawin would have liked to have slept in his bed as was her place, but it was of course far too risky with so many servants in the dun. If the priestess in the village ever learned of their evil, they would come tear them apart. Often over the next few weeks they rode out together to lie down in the grass. Wrapped in his arms, Bragawin could think of Garrett as her husband, her calm, contented, and as fair as a weather summer day after summer day slipping by, like water in a full stream, silently smooth as glass glistening. Nothing could disturb her calm, not even her occasional thought of Yasala, who was betrothed she had taken away, whose betrothed she had taken away. At first it seemed that Garrett too was happy, but slowly his brooding and his rages returned. Garrett was growing more and more like their father, dark as a storm when he was idle, glowering into the fire and pacing restlessly around the ward. One evening when Brythu bought him ale, the lad slipped and spilled it. Garrett swung and slapped him so hard that the lad fell to his knees. "You clumsy little bastard!" As the lad cowered back, Garrett's hand went to his dagger almost of its own will. Bragawin threw herself in between them. "Hold your hand, Garrow. You'll be weeping with remorse in not 5 minutes after you hurt this lad." Sobbing, Brythu fled the hall. Bragawin saw the rest of the servants watching with great faces and terrified eyes. She scrambled to Garrett by the shoulders and shook him hard. "Oh, by the hells," Garrett said, "my thanks." Bragawin fetched him a more ale herself, then went out to the stable where, as she expected, she found Brythu weeping in the hayloft. She hung her candle lantern on a nail in the wall, then sat down and laid a gentle hand on his shoulder. He was only 12, a skinny little thing for his age. Here, Bragawin said, "let me have a look." Brythu wiped the tears away on his sleeve and turned to face her. An ugly red puff was swelling on his cheek, but his eye was unharmed. "Lord Garrett's sorry already. He won't do this again." "My thanks, my lady," Brythu stammered. What was so wrong with Lord Garrett these days? "He's half mad from mourning his father, that's all." Brythu considered, touching the swelling on his cheek. "He would have killed me if it wasn't for you. If ever you want me to do anything for you, I swear I will." Late that night, when everyone was asleep, Bragawin crept out of the chamber and went to Garrett, who was sleeping in their father's room, in their father's bed. The great carved bedstead with embroidered hangings marked the falcons and the privilege of the head of the clan. She slipped in beside him, kissed him awake, and let him take her for the sake of the peace of the house. Afterward, when he lay drowsy in her arms, every muscle at ease, she felt for the first time his one power allowed her to be a woman, to use her beauty and her body and bring her man to the place where he would listen to her instead of only to his whims. It would have been different with my prince, she thought. Tears ran down her cheeks, mercifully hidden from her brother by darkness. Though Bragawin was careful to leave his bed and return to her own the next morning, she had her first intimidation that the rest of the household was beginning to suspect. The men seemed utterly unaware, but at times Bragawin caught Luda watching her with frightened wondering in her eyes. Bragawin took Garrett aside and told him to go hunting and leave her alone. Over the next few days, he ignored her for long hours at a time, going hunting or riding around the demesne. He even began talking of visiting Maddock or Blaine, but always she felt him watching her whenever they were in the same room, as if he were guarding her like a treasure. Although she tried to put him off, finally he insisted that they ride into the hills. That afternoon they found a copse of willows for their lovemaking. She had never seen him so passionate, making love to her as if every time he had made her want her more than rather satisfying him. Afterward he fell asleep in her arms. She stroked his hair and held him, but she felt weary, so tired that she wanted to sink into the earth and never see the sky again. When Garrett woke, he sat up, stretching and smiling at her. Beside him, tangled in his clothes, lay his dagger. "Garrett, kill me now." "I won't, not yet." All at once Bragawin knew it was time to die, that they had to die now, this very afternoon. She sat up and grabbed his arm. "Kill me now, I beg you." Garrett slapped her across the face with the first blow he'd ever given her. When she began to cry, he flung his arms around her, kissed her, and begged for forgiveness. She did forgive him simply because she had no choice. He was more than her whole life. He was her death as well. All during the ride home, she felt her urgency ache her. They should be dead. When they rode into the ward, she saw horses tied up outside. Lord Blaine had come for a visit. Blaine stayed up for 3 days hunting with Garrett while Bragawin crept around and tried to avoid them both. Only once did she have to talk with Blaine alone, and then he held her to his pledge and said not one word about marriage. On his last night there, however, he begged her to stay at the table after dinner. Garrett brooded, staring into the fire and drinking steadily as he forgot they had a guest. When Blaine started talking to Bragawin about his mother, she could only listen miserably, hardly able to answer because she was wondering what Rhoda would say when she learned the truth. Apparently, Blaine misread her silence. "Now here, my lady," Blaine said, "I promise you that I'd never even speak of marriage till the spring, and I keep my word." "What's this?" Garrett swiveled around in his chair. "I've spoken to you before about paying court to your sister." "So you have," Garrett said, smiling. "I've made her a promise, you see. I told her that I'd never make her marry unless she chose to." "Indeed, even if she stays under your roof all her life?" "Just that." Blaine hesitated, his eyes darkening. "Well, my lady," he said to Bragawin, "you're lucky in your brother, aren't you?" "I think so. I honor him." Blaine smiled, but all at once Bragawin was frightened. The glow from the smoky fire danced, but it seemed to her that the fire came from Garrett, as if long tendrils of flame were reaching out for Blaine against their wills. That's a half an hour of reading. When Nevin cast Bragawin out, she and her brother ended up getting together, and now they're shameful over it. But I'll catch you up tomorrow with the rest. Bye.